Hello, everyone. So, I have a lot to get to today. I want to start with the rollback of Dodd-Frank regulations. Um, 16 Senate Democrats voted to gut banking regulations, and these are Obama era rules that came after the Great Recession. So, I find it so funny how people will frame kind of the Democratic stereotype as like, oh yeah, they're just trying to defend Obama no matter what. He can do no wrong, and that's it. That's all that they care about. Well, it's not even true that they defended his legacy across the board. It's been, except for like maybe Obamacare, like they're really not um, keeping his legacy intact. So it should be called out that like it's not even really true because Democrats just keep going to the right. So Doug Jones voted on these deregulations. Um, that guy that beat a pedophile in Alabama, and we all jumped and cheered. Remember that? He's just a blue dog Democrat. Um, then you had Michael Bennet, Tom Carper, Chris Coons, Bill Nelson, Joe Donnelly, Debbie Stabenow, Gary Peters, Claire McCaskill, John Tester, Jean Shaheen, Maggie Hassan, Heidi Heitkamp, Mark Warner, Tim Kaine, and Joe Manchin. So let's go more in depth into what this vote means, getting rid of these regulations. This is from the Washington Post. Senator John Tester, Democrat from Montana, a banking committee member and one of the new bill's leading Democratic supporters, said banks in his largely rural state have been going out of business in part because of the regulations imposed by Dodd-Frank. This is his quote. The Main Street banks, community banks, and credit unions didn't create the crisis in 2008, and they were getting heavily regulated, Tester said, contending that there's not one thing in this bill that gives Wall Street a break. So let's remember that. There's not one thing in this bill that gives Wall Street a break. Now I'm going to go, this is still the Washington Post. This is a newer article. It's like less than a day old at this point. So the Senate passed bipartisan legislation Wednesday designed to ease bank rules that were enacted to prevent a relapse of the 2008 financial crisis that caused millions of Americans to lose their jobs and homes. The Senate voted 67 to 31 for a bill from Republican Senator Mike Crapo, however you pronounce his name, of Idaho that would dial back portions of the law known as Dodd-Frank. The legislation would increase the threshold at which banks are considered so big and plugged into the financial grid that if one were to fail, it would cause major havoc. Those banks are subject to stricter capital and planning requirements, and lawmakers are intent on loosening the restraints on them in hopes that it will boost lending and the economy. President Trump signaled he'll sign the bill once it gets through Congress. Dismantling Dodd-Frank was one of his key campaign pledges. The bill provides much-needed relief from the Dodd-Frank Act for thousands of community banks and credit unions, will spur lending and economic growth without creating risks to the financial system, the White House said in a statement after the vote. So they said it a few times in here. It's going to help thousands of community banks and credit unions. Fine. I'm fine with helping local banks, community banks. But you have to ask yourself here, how much are you willing to sacrifice in order to do that? I mean, it's just because you have a good thing that might come out of that doesn't necessarily mean there's no drawbacks. And here is exactly why there are drawbacks. So you want to hear some of the banks that are going to be affected by this? So first of all, they're talking about raising the cap. It used to be $50 billion. You would get a stricter level of scrutiny from the Federal Reserve, and it was $50 billion, and now they moved that to $250 billion. And you want to hear some of the banks that are going to enjoy less scrutiny now? American Express, yeah, Countrywide Financial, BB&T, and SunTrust Bank are just some of them. And look, it is kind of just a trick. Like who knows if this, this idea that like Dodd-Frank was hurting community banks is even true. Like how many freaking local banks are there that are worth um like $200 billion here? Like I just they don't really substantiate these things with real examples. So it's like how am I supposed to believe that? It sounds to me like you're just using that as an excuse to help out your corporate donors. And by the way, yeah, there's not one thing in this bill that gives Wall Street a break. Yeah, I'm sure American Express has nothing to do with that, right? So it just frustrates me because it's entirely indicative of how the Democrats don't have an economic message. And if they do, it's going in the opposite direction. They're going more to the right. And people are I think starting to see through the BS. And they see that the Democrats aren't really fighting for them. And this makes it so that yes, it is more likely that there will be an economic crash. Excuse me. All right. So then we get to Rex Tillerson, who's out as Secretary of State. Everyone, freaks out about how, oh yeah, he was fired via tweet or something. I don't get into that kind of stuff. I care about what are the actual implications of someone like Rex Tillerson leaving the White House. And I would say, it's not like as if he's perfect. I really would be pressed to find someone in the Trump administration that's perfect. Quite the opposite, probably. But he was someone that was probably preferable to a lot of the far-right people that would follow him. And in this case, Mike Pompeo, he's pretty far-right as you can get. Rex Tillerson, he for example, was not in favor of tearing up the Iran deal. And obviously Trump disagrees with him on that. And now Mike Pompeo, I have to assume he's probably more on the same page as Trump. And that's like the whole reason that they gave, like Rex and Trump didn't really agree on a lot of things, even though I would guess he had respect for him as a person. But the thing that really gets me, though, is so we know Trump is trying to nominate Mike Pompeo to Secretary of State right now. He's nominating Gina Haspel, I think that's how you pronounce her name, to the head of the CIA, Mike Pompeo's former position. And Chuck Schumer comes out and says, "Yeah, we're not gonna block support for these nominations." So in other words, yeah, let's hear them out in their congressional hearings, but we're not going to stand on principle against their nomination. And this is what he tweeted out. "The instability of this administration in just about every area weakens America. If he's confirmed, we hope that Mr. Pompeo will turn over a new leaf and will start toughening up our policies towards Russia and Putin." So that's Chuck Schumer saying we should go more to the right on foreign policy towards Russia. I mean, what does that mean? I would love to know what that means. I know for one thing, people complain that there was articles written that the State Department didn't spend $120 million to combat Russian meddling, and Rex Tillerson basically said, if they're going to do it, they're going to find ways to do it. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, this should probably be no surprise to people who watch my videos, but yeah, I kind of agree, because you're going to spend $120 million on fighting Twitter trolls on the internet, fake accounts, and what is that going to really do? What is even the plan in spending that $120 million? Again, we're not talking about people in Russia, like, literally going in and changing the votes here. We're talking about them putting out some propaganda or whatever, some fake news, and people fall for it, I guess. But look, the responsibility there comes down on sound journalism and leadership from both parties. The Republicans too. That they come out and put their message forward, right? And it's supposed to be essentially a competition between the two parties for, I guess you could say, the intellect of the nation, whose party represents the values of the American people. But suddenly it's become like, oh, these Russian accounts are supposedly influencing people, and therefore that's bad. Um, I made the point before, but yeah, obviously we do way more than influence elections using social media. That's like nothing compared to what we do. But secondly, yeah, the assumption that the parties themselves don't have an impact, and that their words and actions suddenly, like, that's not what matters. It's these Russian accounts. Like, it's complete BS in my opinion. Yeah, okay. So some people fall for these things. Are these people gonna suddenly vote Democrat one day if they don't have these accounts that they're following? Like, I don't think that it comes down to that. People are mostly set in their ways, as I've said before. And look, Mike Pompeo is pro-torture, is fine with Guantanamo Bay being open. Yeah, he advocated executing Edward Snowden. So this is someone that Chuck Schumer is like, he even, like, he had to phrase it in this way because he's trying to, like, not be so pro-Trump that it's obvious. So he's like, we're gonna hold them accountable, and we're gonna listen to them talk and wag our finger at them, and then we're gonna just buckle like a bell, like always, right? I mean, it's always the same story. That they don't know how to actually resist, because what Schumer's doing here is just like basically conceding up front. What a real progressive left party would do is say, no, we're not going to support this guy under any circumstances. Yeah, okay, fine, we can hear you out. I don't care, but we're not going to support you no matter what. But they leave this open question, and it's this stupid game of bipartisanship, excuse me, where it's like, oh yeah, if the Republicans and Democrats agree, that must be a good thing. No, it's usually not a good thing, actually. And Nancy Pelosi is getting a lot of flack right now because she's supporting an anti-LGBT, pro-life candidate who didn't even vote for Obamacare. I mean, how is this guy in the Democratic Party? Come on, let's just be real here. Like, in this day and age, in 2018, you have a Democrat that is anti-LGBT and pro-life, didn't vote for Obamacare. Like, how is that a thing in the Democratic Party? And she's supporting him over a progressive who supports Medicare for all. So let me give you some more details on that. This is from Mother Jones. Hold on one second here. Let me go back to the beginning of the article. So Illinois Democratic Representative Dan Lipinski, his career is on life support. The 7-term congressman from the Chicago area, who inherited his seat from his father, is facing a formidable primary challenge from businesswoman Marie Newman, whose campaign has been fueled by progressive anger at Lipinski's opposition to reproductive rights, LGBT rights, and Obamacare. Emily's List, the national organization that supports pro-choice women candidates, has backed Newman along with a host of progressive groups, including Planned Parenthood and the pro-LGBT rights Human Rights Campaign. And they've spent heavily on ads against Lipinski. Elected Democrats, including Kirsten Gillibrand and fellow Chicago area Representative Jan Schakowsky, have waded into the primary to back Newman. And in an unusual step for a race with a Democratic incumbent, the Democratic congressional campaign committee had declined to endorse Lipinski, but on Thursday, less than 3 weeks before the March 20 primary, Lipinski picked up one notable supporter, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. Oh, isn't that interesting? Pelosi has shown a greater tolerance for blue dog Democrats than others in her caucus. When progressives criticized the DCCC for refusing to apply a reproductive rights litmus test to 2018 candidates, Pelosi insisted there was room in the party for anti-abortion candidates. This is the Democratic Party. This is not a rubber stamp party. Complete and utter just ridiculousness with that last quote there. I mean, basically what she's saying is the Democratic Party has no values. We can be fine with whatever candidate if they're against reproductive rights, which this is, a solved issue here. Okay, Roe versus Wade is a thing, and there have been other Supreme Court cases that are more recent that have been more or less in favor of the pro-choice argument, and we have candidates that are just regressive. It's a regressive thing if you're going to be having people in your party that are not in favor, first of all, of the people in the party. The overwhelming majority of Democrats are pro-choice, and it just, like I say, goes against the history and precedent that we've set already in terms of that issue. So it's, again, another example of the Democrats. They go to the right. They're trying to do this because they think, these states, right? Or cities or whatever district. Oh, you got to be more right wing because it's a more rural area or something, and you have to appeal to those people. But this has been proven wrong. Just look at the special election in Pennsylvania recently. Conor Lamb won the election, and he was a more progressive candidate, and he focused not on the social issues, but the economic populism. And that's what you do in those situations. Because what happens is people will forego their I guess, necessity to have that pro-life, anti-LGBT position. They'll forego caring about that, basically, if they have a candidate that cares about the economics and wants to actually better their lives and promote a system that is not corrupt and in favor of the elite. This is why Bernie Sanders was actually pretty popular amongst conservatives, which goes against kind of what you would think is correct, because, I mean, Hillary was more to the right, but it's just true. He did have support amongst Trump supporters, even. So the Democrats don't know how to capitalize on these things. They totally could, and I think they probably know that they could go to the left and be more formidable, but they don't want to lose those corporate donations. And frankly, I mean, it gets a little conspiratorial when you're talking this way, but a lot of times I think people look at the outcomes in our political system, and it's like sometimes these parties are paid to lose. It's just like kind of a way of keeping real change from happening. And I look at the Democrats now, and I think to myself, like, really, this is not too far from where the Republicans were under Obama during his first term. And they formed the Tea Party, and it was just basically opposition without really any solutions. It was like far-right dogma all day long, pretty much. It was, at least the Tea Party had a kind of more concise and clear message. It was just really out there, and people were kind of, at least most reasonable people were like, yeah, these are dumb ideas. The Democrats, they have no real message. Except basically meet the Republicans halfway on everything, which basically means the Republicans get what they want altogether. Um, so then, like I say, there needs to be a real economic message, not just platitudes and cliches, which we've been getting for so long now. We need to address the corruption in our system. We need to address income inequality. The Democrats are not being introspective after the election. It's really coming down to they're not learning the lessons for why they lost. They want to scapegoat Russia all day long. I know, but there's no conclusive evidence that affected the outcome of the election. And everyone, in Mueller's investigation, everyone who's looked into this, they stipulate clearly there's no evidence it had any impact. So, when that day comes and there's evidence for it, yeah, I'll take a look at it. But, until then, yeah, the Democrats lost the election, and it's not as if the Russians rigged it in favor of the Republicans. That's just not true at this point. This is indicative of the hashtag resistance that I kind of say. I call it hashtag resistance because it's fake. It's just a appearance of resistance because, let's make fun of Trump's tone or something, or make fun of the way he fired Rex Tillerson. It's not a very serious view of things because it's not policy oriented. It's as if the Democrats just basically want to do this cult of personalities thing, which, it worked for some people, but I think in terms of a general election, it's not a winning strategy, and we've seen that because look at the 2016 election, and it was basically all identity politics and just a showdown of these political juggernauts and comparing their personalities more or less and be it's I'm more fit for office than this person, and on and on. But what's missing from this resistance is they are not advocating for radical reforms, and you see this throughout all the different aspects of the party establishment. They just alienate people. The DCCC, which is something not a lot of people, I think, know about or talk about. And I think a lot of the establishment will kind of talk around and be they don't have any real say over the candidate's message or anything like that. So they're a neutral party, right? That's what they say about the DNC too. How neutral was that last election? The DCCC, they're a resource that if they're not on your side, you're really not going to do well. It's going to be a long shot at the very least. They opt to not support populist candidates, and like Nancy Pelosi said with this rubber, we're not a rubber stamp party. Another way to say that is this big tent party where you just have everyone, like I say, it doesn't even matter if it's a viewpoint that's you would feel right at home at the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is so big that we can allow in the opposition, basically. And they always go for that over the progressive candidate. And then the DNC recently, they voted to delay changes on superdelegates. So to me, that strikes me as what little changes you can get from the Democratic Party and the process to make it more of a democratic way of doing things, right? It's in the freaking name of the party, but they won't allow even slightly significant changes or even less than that. It's they don't want anything that will prevent the elite from having control. That's what superdelegates are. They're basically party elite that can vote any way they want and pledge their support to whoever they want, regardless of any other election results. And what did we see in 2016? Well, the superdelegates, like the majority of them, pretty much pledged to Hillary before a single primary happened. And people will say, like, oh, well, that doesn't have a real effect because the pledged delegates, I guess, matter more. It's like, I just don't get these rationalizations anymore. Like if you have a system where it's even slightly going against the democratic will of the people, like, it's not going to do well. It's just the way it is. It's going to be much harder for you to convince people, like, oh, we need to let the party leaders steer the ship, even though they've been failing for so long. They're out of touch and don't even know what their base wants. But no, we have to be in charge of everything, and we've been so successful so far. Not. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is Hillary's, rather unnecessary statement about how the states where she won are moving forward, the states where Trump won are moving backwards, and she justified this by saying the states where she won represent 2/3 of the GDP. Look, I understand. Like, this is a right wing thing here to like basically take the stock market, and say, like, oh, this is indicative of success, right? No. Middle class Americans struggle all over the country, even in places where you probably won, Hillary. So that's not the way to view things, and it just strikes me as, like, so divisive and not productive at all. It really is just like, so the states where Trump won, they're like losers, basically, is what she's saying. And that's not going to be a winning strategy, okay? You're not going to get people to flip for you if you're just basically demeaning them. This is why she's not a strong leader. She doesn't stand for real policies that would help people. She just basically wants to say, my neoliberalism is completely right, no argument about that, and we're just going to fight to do that. We're going to fight to do the same thing that we were doing under Obama. And I've always maintained that Obama had some pretty good successes in certain areas, didn't go far enough in other areas. But Hillary was to the right of Obama, in my opinion, except for maybe on guns, but that's a different issue. The economic side of it is, at least Obama, like Dodd-Frank again, that was a regulation that had a lot of loopholes, and it didn't go far enough to really clamp down on the big banks. But now we're in a position where that's going to be even less scrutiny now for a lot of big banks. And someone like Hillary, who's in the pocket of Wall Street, like, it's hard for me to picture that she would have, stand on principle and been opposed to rolling back these regulations. And you don't hear her coming out and saying stuff like that. Like in the wake of these things, like, she doesn't talk about policy at all now. So this idea that she's like this hero, I really don't stand by that, because it seems to me like when she talks, it's all about self-aggrandizement and basically just faux populism and resistance against Trump.